There's a name missing from the Bible you grew up with. Not missing because nobody wrote it down. Missing because somebody decided you shouldn't read it. I want you to sit with that for a second. Somewhere in the earliest centuries of Christianity, there was a divine figure so powerful, so central to how people understood God, that entire communities built their faith around her. And then slowly, quietly, she disappeared from the official story. Her name was Sophia. It means wisdom. And for a long time, wisdom wasn't an idea. Wisdom was a she. Today I'm taking you into one of the strangest, most suppressed threads in religious history. A goddess of wisdom who existed before the world was made, who fell, who broke, and who was written out of the official record by the very institution that once knew her name. This isn't fringe internet mythology. This is documented. It's sitting in libraries. It survived in the sand for over 1,000 years. By the end of this video, you're going to understand why some scholars call her the most important erased figure in Western religion. And I think, once you hear her story, you won't be able to unhear it. So who actually was Sophia? Strip away the mystery for a second, and here's the plain truth. Sophia is the Greek word for wisdom. That's it. That's the root. But somewhere in ancient Jewish thought, wisdom stopped being just a quality a person could have, and started being something else entirely. A being. A presence. Something that existed before creation, and helped bring it into form. You can see the seeds of this in the book of Proverbs, where wisdom speaks in the first person, claiming she was there before the mountains were settled, playing at God's side as the world was made. That's not a metaphor buried quietly in a footnote. That's wisdom personified, describing herself as present at the beginning of everything. Now here's where it gets deep. Centuries later, a movement inside early Christianity took that idea and ran with it much further than the mainstream church ever did. This movement is called Gnosticism, from the Greek word gnosis, meaning direct, inner knowledge. Not knowledge you're told, knowledge you experience. One of the most important teachers in this movement was a man named Valentinus, a 2nd century Christian theologian, so respected in his own time that he was reportedly considered for the position of Bishop of Rome. Think about that. A man whose teachings would later be branded heretical almost became one of the most powerful religious leaders in the ancient world. Valentinus and the tradition around him taught that Sophia wasn't just a poetic idea. She was a real divine being, an emanation of God, one of the eons living within a realm called the Pleroma, which simply means the fullness. Picture the Pleroma as the truest layer of divine reality, a place made entirely of aspects of God, expressed as beings, each one a piece of the whole. And Sophia was one of them. The youngest, the most curious. Here's my honest take, and I'll say it plainly. I don't think it's an accident that the version of divinity most obsessed with hierarchy and order is the version that survived, and the version that centered a curious, searching, feminine wisdom is the one that got buried. That's not proof of a conspiracy, but it's a pattern, and patterns are worth paying attention to. Stay with me, because what happens to Sophia next is where this story turns from theology into something closer to tragedy. December 1945. Upper Egypt. The desert air is cold at night and sharp in the morning, and a farmer named Muhammad Ali al-Salman is digging near the base of a cliff, close to the town of Nag Hammadi. He's not looking for history. He's looking for fertilizer, soft, nitrate-rich soil to spread on his crops. His spade hits something hard. He kneels down, brushes away the dirt, and there, buried beneath the ground for over 1,600 years, is a large sealed clay jar. For a moment, he hesitates. In the local tradition, jars like this were sometimes feared to contain jinn, spirits that could be released if disturbed. But curiosity wins. He raises the spade and breaks it open. Inside, wrapped and preserved by the dry desert air, are 13 leather-bound books. Ancient, fragile, untouched by human hands for centuries. He has no idea what he's holding. Some of the pages are even burned for cooking fuel before anyone realizes what they are. It takes years, before scholars fully understand what fell out of that jar. And when they finally do, historians call it one of the greatest archaeological discoveries of the 20th century. Because inside those books were texts the official church had tried to erase. The Gospel of Thomas, the Apocryphon of John, and buried inside those pages, still intact after all that time, Sophia. Her full mythology, her fall, her fullest, deepest story, hidden not in a museum, not in a library, but in a jar in the ground, waiting. I think about that moment a lot. An ordinary man, digging for fertilizer, cracks open history's best-kept secret completely by accident. Not a scholar, not a priest, not someone looking for it at all. And to me, that says something bigger than the discovery itself. The truths that matter most in history rarely get handed down politely through the front door. They survive in jars, in deserts, in the places nobody thought to look. And I think Sophia's whole story, her burial and her return, is a perfect mirror of that same pattern. Now that she's been found again, let's actually go inside her story. What was she said to have done? And why did it cost her so much? Here's where the myth gets strange, and honestly kind of beautiful. Inside the Pleroma, the fullness of divine reality, Sophia is the youngest of the Eons. She's curious. She wants to know the source of everything, the way you might feel a pull to understand where you came from, why you exist, what's beyond what you can see. That longing on its own isn't a flaw. It's the most human thing imaginable. But according to the myth, Sophia tries to create, to bring something new into being, without her partner Aeon, acting from desire alone rather than in balance with the rest of the fullness. And something goes wrong. What emerges from that act isn't whole. It's flawed, broken. A lesser being, sometimes called the Demiurge, who mistakenly believes he is the one true God, unaware of the greater divine reality above him. This flawed being goes on to shape the material world, the physical universe you and I live in. And trapped inside that material world, according to the myth, are sparks of true divine light, scattered fragments of the fullness, waiting to remember what they actually are. But here's the part that I think gets skipped too often, and it's the part that gives this myth real teeth. The Demiurge doesn't work alone. Beneath him, the texts describe a set of ruler beings called the Archons, guardians, gatekeepers, forces that patrol the boundary between the material world and the true divine light above it. Some texts describe them as partly blind, shaped in distorted forms, terrified of anything that might wake the trapped spark inside you up. And here's what strikes me about that. The Archons aren't described as pursuing some grand evil scheme. They're described as afraid. Afraid of remembering. Afraid of light. Their whole function, according to the myth, is to keep the forgetting going, to keep the spark inside every person distracted, asleep, convinced that the material world is all there is. Some later readings even connect them to the pull of pure habit, distraction, and noise. Anything that keeps you from turning inward and asking the deeper question. I find that detail genuinely unsettling in a good way, because it means the myth isn't just describing a flawed creator. It's describing an entire structure built, consciously or not, to keep forgetting comfortable. And whether you take that literally or symbolically, I think most people have felt something like that pull in their own life. The sense that staying asleep is easier than waking up. Now pause here, because I want to be honest with you about something. This is symbolic language. Nobody teaching this seriously believed it as a literal science lesson. It's a myth about consciousness, about how a single mistake, a single act of longing without balance, can spiral into an entire flawed world, guarded by forces built to keep that mistake hidden. Here's what strikes me most, and this is genuinely my opinion, not a historical fact. I don't think Sophia's fall was ever meant to be read as a punishment story, the way Eve's story so often gets read. Sophia isn't cursed for her curiosity. She's not blamed the way the earliest interpretations of Eve blamed her for the fall of humanity. Sophia's story is closer to tragedy than sin. She reaches for something too big, too soon, and the cost is real, but the myth treats her with sympathy, not condemnation. Some Gnostic texts even describe her eventually being restored, lifted back toward the fullness once the imbalance is corrected. That distinction matters to me. A divine feminine figure who falls, and is still shown compassion, is a very different story than the one most of us were raised on. But this deeper, stranger, more forgiving version of the divine feminine didn't survive into the mainstream. And in the next part, I want to walk you through exactly why. So why did Sophia disappear from the version of Christianity that became dominant? I want to be fair here, because this isn't a story about villains. It's a story about choices, and every choice has a cost. In the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th centuries, Christianity was still figuring out what it was. There wasn't one unified church with one agreed set of beliefs. Gnostic Christianity, with its Eons, its Archons, its fallen wisdom figure, was one strand among many competing for the truth. One of the loudest voices arguing against that strand was a bishop named Irenaeus of Lyon, whose work against heresies helped define what the growing church would accept and what it would reject. A religion trying to survive persecution and unify millions of converts needed something simple. One God, one hierarchy, one set of scriptures. Gnosticism asked people to seek inner gnosis, not just obey an outer structure. And structure won. Here's my honest opinion. I don't think this was some evil plot in a smoky back room. I think it was something more human, a quiet decision to choose order over mystery. But that choice cost something. It cost Sophia her name, her place in the story. Here's the part that gives me chills, though. She didn't fully die. She just went underground, literally and symbolically. And that's where the story gets even more interesting. If you think Sophia vanished completely once the councils and the creeds settled the official story, you'd be wrong. Wisdom has a strange habit of finding cracks to grow through. In Jewish mysticism, particularly the Kabbalah, there's a concept called the Shekinah, the felt, dwelling presence of God in the world, frequently described in feminine terms. It's not identical to Sophia, but the resemblance is impossible to ignore. A divine feminine presence, close to creation, close to human experience, quietly persisting alongside a more distant, patriarchal image of God. In the 12th century, a remarkable woman named Hildegard von Bingen, a Christian mystic, composer, and visionary abbess whose work was so respected that she corresponded directly with popes and kings, described visions of a radiant divine feminine figure she called sapientia, the Latin word for wisdom. Hildegard wasn't a heretic hiding in the desert. She was operating inside the church itself, and still, wisdom kept showing up to her wearing a feminine face. Centuries later, you find her again in Russian Orthodox mysticism, in a movement called Sophiology, developed by thinkers like Sergei Bulgakov, who tried to reintroduce Sophia as a bridge between God and creation. Proof that even inside mainstream Christian tradition, this idea refused to stay buried. And then, in the 20th century, something fascinating happens. Carl Jung, the Swiss psychiatrist who founded analytical psychology and gave us concepts like the shadow and the collective unconscious, became deeply fascinated with Gnostic texts, including the myth of Sophia and the Archons that guarded her fallen world. Jung read that whole structure not just as ancient theology, but as a psychological map. The anima, the inner feminine wisdom every person carries, lost and searching for wholeness, while inner forces that look a lot like Archons work quietly to keep you distracted from that search. I find that genuinely moving. A myth born in the deserts of Egypt, buried by orthodoxy, resurfaces 2,000 years later in the office of a psychiatrist trying to understand the human mind. That's not coincidence to me. That's what real hidden knowledge looks like, not a secret kept in a vault, but a truth so persistent it keeps finding new doors to walk through, century after century, no matter how many times it gets locked out of the front one. So now the question becomes personal. Why does any of this actually matter to you? Here's what I really want you to take from this. Sophia was never just a historical curiosity. She represents something you already carry, whether you've ever heard her name before today or not. The difference between knowledge that's handed to you from outside and wisdom you find inside yourself through direct experience. Think about how much of modern life pushes you toward the first kind. Rules, instructions, approved answers, somebody else's hierarchy telling you what's true. And think about how rare it is to be told to trust the quieter voice, the one that knows things before you can explain how you know them, the one that feels more than reasons. That's the territory Sophia represents. Not obedience, inner knowing. And if the Archons represent anything real in your life, I don't think it's some external evil force. I think it's every distraction, every piece of noise, every comfortable habit that keeps you from sitting still long enough to ask the deeper question. The myth might be ancient, but that pull towards staying asleep is something you probably recognize immediately. I genuinely believe Sophia's erasure from mainstream religious history mirrors something a lot of people still experience personally. A sense that their own intuitive, felt understanding of the divine has been pushed aside in favor of someone else's official version. If that resonates with you even a little, I don't think that's an accident. You don't need a Gnostic cosmology or a Kabbalistic framework to feel this. You just need to notice the moments in your own life when you knew something was true before anyone told you it was. That flicker, that spark. Some traditions would say that spark is the same one Sophia carried into the material world in the first place. A fragment of something greater, waiting inside you to be remembered. Maybe that's exactly why her story survived a burial that lasted 16 centuries. So here's where I land on all of this. Institutions can bury a name. They can leave it out of a canon, brand it heresy, seal it away in the ground. But they can't actually kill an idea that's true enough to keep finding its way back, through a mystic's vision, a psychiatrist's notebook, or a farmer's spade striking a jar he wasn't even looking for. Sophia waited 1600 years in the dark, and she came back anyway. I think that says something about every buried truth, and maybe every buried part of you too. It doesn't have to be found today, but it's not gone. It's just waiting for someone curious enough to start digging. If this story moved something in you, I'd genuinely love to hear it. Drop a comment and tell me what part of Sophia's story hit you the hardest. And if you want to keep going deeper into the hidden threads of history like this one, make sure you're subscribed, because we've only just cracked open the jar.